Hello, welcome back to the channel, and in this episode we're going to be looking at the Mirror of Galadriel.
Hello, Miri here. So I don't think we need a recap of this whole scene, so we'll just get straight into it.
What is the significance of water in that scene?
When she first appears, or before she pours the water into the well or font or whatever it is, she looks a bit like the water carrier in astrology, Aquarius. And it's not made explicit, but she does seem to have those heavenly qualities to her. And it makes me think the first association is between water and the sky, actually, between the celestial beings and water.
She looks like starlight.
And she looks like starlight. And it seems the atmosphere is one of starlight and or moonlight at the same time. So the water has a slight connotation of liquid starlight or the shower of Danaid in the myth. So I think that was my first association with it before it even becomes the mirror. I guess the other association with water, apart from the obvious ones to do with purification and so on, is that it is liquid and mutable and changeable, and that it brings with it a certain degree of uncertainty as well as clarity. And in fact, that's then played out where Frodo is told that although his destiny or fate is being shown to him, he can influence it in some way. So again, you get a play of certainty and uncertainty, I suppose, and water is both clear, connoting certainty, and liquid and unstable, connoting uncertainty in some way. So I think all of that is going on. And water, I suppose, is almost like the liquid equivalent of light because it's so reflective in some way. And of course, that's very important in the characterization of Galadriel because she's associated with this sparkling quality, particularly in that dress, which is like a bridal gown, I think. And in fact, it's quite interesting what the dynamic actually is between the two of them there, because it's not sexual. There's no erotic connection there. It's slightly maternal. There's a soupçon of the maternal there, but it's probably most like two beings, one of whom is comfortable on this starry astral plane, Galadriel, and the other, Frodo, who is very much associated with the earth so far and has been a creature of the earth, but through this colloquy is brought up or brought in to the sphere of the stars in some way, as if he's being elevated. And of course he is being elevated in terms of his stature in the story from something earthly to something more starry. And liquid seems almost the medium of his transformation, or almost even evaporation.
So the mirror is almost like a scrying mirror where you can see the future. Does that make Galadriel kind of witch?
It makes her a kind of witch or knower or soothsayer or savant or an adept of some kind. I don't think necessarily witch in particular, any one of those beings capable of insight not usually afforded ordinary creatures, I suppose.
I'm just thinking of what Gimli describing her as a witch, and I'm just imagining other people in Middle-earth seeing her as that kind of thing.
Yeah, and if she is a witch, I suppose she's largely a white witch. She's dressed in white. She's pretty largely connoted with good and benign intent, although there's a moment there, of course, when she's brought into the sphere of the ring and the power of the ring, where that's put in question again, as it is for everybody who comes into its force field, as it were. So there, I mean, she's a little bit witchy. I'm not sure how far that takes us as an analysis. I mean, she has the accoutrements of witchhood insofar as she has objects like this pitcher and this font that she deploys and the water and the mirror. So there's some of the apparatus of witchery, I suppose.
When she starts communicating with Frodo telepathically, that actually reminded me of the intro to the film, and it kind of made me feel like she was communicating to us telepathically when she's describing the events of what happened before.
Yes, I think she has 3 voices so far. One is the narrative voice right at the beginning, which steps into the authorial voice, the overall narrator of the story. And as we said, I think in the very first episode, for me that creates a little bit of confusion, or at least uncertainty about what her status is and whether she's legitimately in that position, as opposed to being one of the characters. What gives her the voice of authority there? So that's voice number 1. Voice number 2 is the outward voice that can be heard with the ears, as it were. And the third voice is the inner voice, that what you call the telepathic voice, which she's used with Frodo before in the preceding scene and uses again here. So I'm not sure about what kind of status that voice gives her. I mean, in this scene, it's the mirror, which is the...
Yeah.
I mean, we can move on to the voice, but the mirror...
What's your thoughts about the mirror?
There's an allusion, as we've said before, this film is highly allusive without being directly allegorical. And it alludes to the idea of the memento mori, that you look into the mirror in times of crisis, and this is effectively a time of crisis. In the traditional memento mori, you look in the mirror and see your own death, and it becomes a reminder to carpe diem, to live a good life and make the most of it. And there is an element of that, actually, when Frodo looks in the mirror. There is a element of memento mori, because what it shows is, after the recap of events thus far, a projection forward into a potential outcome in which he and Samwise are enslaved.
Yeah.
And presumably that leads to some awful end for them in some way. So there is an element of the mirror showing him death, or his potential death in some way. So the mirror and the memento mori, I think, are associated there. Along with that, we have the notion of self-knowledge. I think one of the other allusions in that sequence is to Ovid's Narcissus, the looking in the pool, for a self-knowledge which is elusive. Now, in the case of Ovid's Narcissus, he's looking in the pool in order to touch the face that he sees reflected out of narcissistic love. In the case of Frodo, there is this question of self-identity for him, because he's been conferred with this status. He's been chosen, anointed, I think, or appointed, she says. I think appointed rather than anointed. As the chosen one, he has been nominated, and he hasn't fully caught up with this image of himself as savior, leader, messiah, hero, rescuer. All of those things, I think, are wrapped up in that character to be, that he is slightly resisting. He says he's afraid. Slightly agreeing with. There's still a bit of push and pull, I suppose, between those two things. So the mirror serves as a vehicle of self-recognition. The paradox in this case is that the self that Frodo sees is one he only half recognizes, essentially, because it's reminding him of a fate that he hadn't willingly sketched out for himself or chosen, but has rather been given to him. And again, we have this notion of the Christian Messiah. This is a appointed role rather than a claimed role.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that, as we've said in a previous episode, I think it helps with our sympathy with him, that he's not too egoic about it.
Although he does volunteer.
He volunteers, but almost out of humility rather than pride. It's not an attempt at self-aggrandizement. It's more an act of service.
Yeah.
That he will give himself willingly, almost as an act of sacrifice, for the good of the others. There's no hint of him sacrificing himself in order to enhance his own renown and reputation even beyond the grave. So it's a gesture made more out of humility and service, I think, than out of ego and pride.
And what do you think happens to Galadriel when she's offered the ring?
So she is offered the ring, and like others we've seen before, she almost salivates at the prospect of getting it, because it's, well, you made this point very early on, it has this almost addictive quality. It's the crack in the film. It's the thing that people want to get there their hands on it, and it's something that denatures people when they come into its orbit. And we see Galadriel momentarily take on this much more demonic, almost satanic set of characteristics. And we begin to see her transmuted into this, another kind of agent of Sauron, I suppose, or worse, as though she won't be able to withstand the force of the ring. Of course she does, ultimately, and that's what she's pleased with. Look, I withstood it, and I'm just going to carry on now being Galadriel, as though just being Galadriel is an ordinary choice. I'm just going to carry on being, queen of the underworld or whatever she is. And actually, that's, by the way, I should say, that's another one of the, again, many allusions here, I think, is probably to Proserpina, the queen of the underworld. Because although she's light, she seems to arrive from a realm more of death, actually, than light in some way. Or the dead that are undead, the ongoing living somehow. And we talked in the last episode about her quality of being as differentiated from being with a small b, and I think we have that again. We have that again here. I mean, the other element of the water there is to create a sense of an abyss, and there is a looking into the abyss which threatens to pull everybody into it like a well. It reminded me of Nietzsche's phrase about the abyss: when we look into the abyss, it looks back at you. Are we strong enough to withstand the vortex that could plunge us into the middle of it? And Galadriel is strong enough to withstand it. Her power is such that she can continue to be herself. I mean, again, there's a question as to, well, why doesn't Galadriel continue this quest? Why is it so emphatically Frodo? Why is this nomination so squarely falling upon his shoulders, almost out of the blue, that there is a responsibility that cannot be, well, it can be avoided, I suppose. It can be downplayed, but it can't really be shirked. And that in turn reminded me, because we were talking about Heidegger last time, of what Heidegger says about what belongs to us more than anything else. And Heidegger says actually it's our death that belongs to us more than anything else. But in the case of Frodo, if we think about what is his own most, to use Heidegger's phrase, what is it that Frodo owns and has and possesses more than anything else, even more than his own identity now, is his ownership of this task.
Yeah.
And nobody else can step in. There's a non-substitutability now about Frodo, which I think is interesting. Nobody else is going to be able to take his place. And that complete sense of the uniquity around him, I think, is very thought-provoking, because the Fellowship, as Fellowship, ought to suggest that people can step in for one another. Like when we've seen them fighting, you're struggling, I'll step in and save you, I'll fend off the baddie. As though there's an interchangeability between them, or they could be substituted, or like a football team, somebody could be called off the bench. That's not the case now with Frodo. He's become purely unsubstitutable, and I find that very interesting, that gives him now a preeminence over and above the Fellowship, actually, which he hasn't necessarily enjoyed before. And when Galadriel says there's a risk to the Fellowship, there's somebody in it who might threaten it, I mean, my mind went to Boromir, it might be somebody else. But in a way, it's also Frodo at a more philosophical level, because he's now of the Fellowship, but also above it, and he's no longer replaceable. And there's a sense in which he is moved the Fellowship now into a different structure of Messiah and disciples, leader and followers, in a way that hasn't been quite as explicit. It's been evolving, but it hasn't been completely explicit, I think, until Galadriel says, you are the one, you are the only one.
Yeah.
I mean, Gandalf has sort of said it, but somehow the way Galadriel says it gives it an absolute authority.
Yeah. And they have a moment together where she shows him that she's also a ring bearer.
Yes, that's interesting. And she refers to adamant,
Yeah.
the quality. And we talked, when we were talking about mithril, about the quality of adamantine as well. And it's interesting that we've got adamantine, adamant, we've had mithril. These are physical equivalents, I think, of the moral virtues that the film is quite keen to project. That there are some things in the world, or this world, Middle Earth, that are unbreakable and can't be dissolved or changed or fractured in some way. The ring is obviously one of them. Mithril, adamant, these are others. And it's as if this physical world needs to have a corresponding set of forces in the moral world. And that moral world is essentially one of will, and Frodo's will to restore the ring to where it belongs.
You said about the dynamic of the relationship. At the end, it's quite a mothering, paternal relationship where she says to him, she gives him comfort when he says that he's scared, and she says, even the smallest person can change the course of the future.
Yes, it is quite maternal. And when she first appears in that scene, she walks past this statue, which looks to me like the statue that Aragorn had gone to look at, the Mother Mary-like statue with the torches either side of it. But it is a bit ambiguous because, as I say, she has this bridal quality too. We know she's got a husband, or if that's the right word for him, and yet she looks like a perpetual bride. A bit like in that Keats poem, "Thou still unravished bride of quietness," when he's talking about the Grecian urn. She has a quality of the Grecian urn about her. So she's a wife, but also a bride. She's a maternal character to some degree, but she's also entirely above it all. She's a warrior to some degree because we see her withstanding the ring. So she's brought into some sort of...
Yeah, she's got armour on.
Yeah.
She's kind of like a if I think about the Irish pantheon of gods, she's like a Bridget, so Bridget's bride.
Right. Yeah, although she's not associated with fertility, I don't think, in this. She's more of a tutelary spirit, I think. In other words, there for protection, ultimately.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking because if she's a bride, then that links to fertility.
It does, and obviously motherhood does too, but I mean, fertility insofar as Frodo represents the regeneration somehow of Gandalf as a new generation in some way, and it's kind of endorsed by her. But I think calling her a fertility goddess is a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, I wouldn't call her a fertility goddess, just because often on St. Bridget's Day people dress up as brides.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah.
But I see her dress more of a kind of celestial thing, like you have the wood elves that dress like the part of the earth, and these elves are obviously something a little bit higher, and so they dress more like the stars.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. There's something more astral about her.
Yes. Watching it now, analysing it, it's really interesting to see the ways that the different things that the filmmakers use to make her look the way she does. Like, she's glowing, everything's slowed down a bit. When she's pouring the water, you can barely hear the water. It sounds like it's coming from somewhere far away in the distance. And it really adds to the uncanniness of the whole scene.
Yeah, I mean, the word uncanny came up when we spoke about it last time, when also we were referring to Freud a little bit. Freud has a famous essay on the uncanny where he associates the uncanny with the return of the repressed. Now, I don't know if Galadriel represents something that's been repressed returning, like a horror that's been buried or a sexual fantasy that's not been allowed or something, which is what Freud talks about. And yet she does have a spectral quality to her, as though she is always returning from somewhere deeper, older, less fathomable. I mean, I talked about the underworld before. And that, I think, connotes her with old time, slow time, again, to use the Keats analogy in some way. And that does make her a bit uncanny. She's, as we were saying last time, present without being present, or overly present without being present enough. She's both at the same time. And I think the way, I mean, Kate Blanchett's voice is naturally quite low, but I think
she's deepened it.
She seems to have deepened it a bit to give it more resonance.
I read the same thing happened with Arwen, because the actress has got a very high, kind of really feminine high voice, but she's deepened her voice as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speculate too much on this, but I wonder a little bit, although she's very feminine and very beautiful in all sorts of ways, and statuesque and etc., whether there's something in the deepening of the voice that is trying to say, although she's female, she's not gendered in some way. She is both at the same time. She's very female and also not gendered, because the being not gendered elevates her above gender altogether, and helps to reinforce this sense of her as an oracle of some kind. It slightly helps her to remove herself from the mortal world of generation and regeneration if she's not so completely or 100% associated with the female. At the same time, she is, by the way, she's extremely female, feminine, whatever you want to call, very beautiful, etc. But there is something in the lowering of the voice there, which is quite marked, I think, that suggests to me that there is a slight bracketing of the female quality in order to suggest something that transcends all genders.
It gives a kind of authority as well.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a bit of a stereotype to say there's more authority in lower voices, and lower voices are male and so on, but it gives it an orotund quality, gravitas, literally, a heaviness of some kind. I think that's true.
What I always was surprised at, when Frodo's looking into the mirror and Sauron appears, and the ring is being sucked in, Galadriel's just there looking at him like not doing anything.
Yes, that's interesting again, because we spoke in an earlier episode about why doesn't Gandalf intervene more, and here we have Galadriel not intervening more.
Yeah.
I think in both cases there's a respect for the course of fate as embodied by Frodo. Like, Frodo has to be the one who experiences all of this, even at the risk of him suffering, even at the risk of him dying, actually. So the non-intervention, I think, is that which enables Frodo's own agency. And his agency, interestingly, is a fascinating combination of free will and predetermination. It's very hard to separate the two things out. He's embodying both, I think. He's both embracing fate and able to make some choices. And of course, we have Galadriel saying, I'm showing you what will happen if you don't do anything. So this thing called fate is not completely beyond our influence. We can influence it in turn. But her holding back from intervening, just as Gandalf's holding back from intervening, I think is what enables the space of action around Frodo and respect for him as this, as we were saying, unique individual to be in their own sphere of agency, I suppose.
What do you think the point of the scene is?
Well, it helps to reinforce the idea that Frodo is the one and the responsibility is on him, and he can actually steer fate towards a positive outcome. That's critical. But I think, given this is a film thus far, which is so much about and I hesitate to use the word really because it's so loaded these days, but a film about patriarchy, about male lineage. And we've had the discussion in the previous scene about Boromir and his own father. We've had the loss of Gandalf, who's been, if not a father figure, then a sort of uncle figure, granddad uncle figure to Frodo. It makes it conspicuous to me now with Galadriel here how we have thus far got along with the absence of the mother. And there's no sense of Frodo. Well, we have a sense of Frodo's, as it were, substitute parentage or substitute male figures, the brothers and fathers and uncles and all the rest of it. But we don't really have a sense of him with a female line. And so there is this sense, I think, of the absent mother. And if we were to look at it from a psychoanalytic point of view, we do have Galadriel in a semi-maternal role, being a kind of semi-mother to Frodo. And at the same time, as we were saying, she also has this slightly bridal quality to her. So her status isn't entirely fixed here. There is something, it's not, I wouldn't describe it as erotic or sexual, but there is a sort of fantasy element to her. She is a bit like, for Frodo, in Frodo's eyes, she will be operating, psychically speaking, as a fantasy mother in some way. This beautiful, refulgent, perfect mother who it's possible to look up to and sort of fall in love with a little bit. So I think all of that is going on. I think the point of this scene for Frodo, in a sense, is to give him or restore to him a sense of what that absent mother might have been. A very idealized version of it, by the way. But then you could say Gandalf was an idealized version of the father or the uncle and so on. But she's a particularly idealized mother. And that, I suppose, in turn, gives him, along with the other powers that he's accrued through being appointed as the One and through having the ring and so on, a sense of some security behind him. Although she's not going to travel with him, there is a sense that he has at least somewhere had the experience of the presence of the mother after toiling in the absence of the mother for some time. So that's one way of understanding it.
Yeah. I think by the end of that scene, he felt a bit stronger and braver just after having that conversation with her.
Yeah. Yes, I think he did. And she implicitly is sort of saying, be a brave boy. And she's packing him off to go off to boarding school or something. And I think it does strengthen him a bit. And it would seem like, although I'm sure there are many trials to come, he is now equipped with more or less everything he needs in order to withstand the trials ahead. He's got the ring, he's got the mithril, he's got the blessing of Gandalf, he's got the democratic support of the Fellowship. And now he has this rather, fantastical, idealized image of the mother restored to him, she having been removed for so long throughout the film. So in that sense, the point of the film was also to equip him at this psychological, even psychoanalytic level.
Thank you for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, and become a member if you want to get early access to the videos. And we'll see you in the next one.